everyone, it's Judy Warner. Wait till you see who I have for you today. He's one of your favorites and absolutely one of mine. Today I speak with Steve Sandler of Picotest. If you've seen Steve on LinkedIn and on his website, he's a power integrity expert for more than 40 years now. He's considered one of the leading experts in this discipline, and he's going to teach you a lot today in our conversation. Most of all, we're going to talk about a tool he developed called the Non-Invasive Stability Measurement Tool that is now being integrated in most of your test and measurement platforms and is probably accessible to you already in your existing equipment. So I hope you enjoy this conversation between myself and Steve Sandler. I want to give a shout out to our new sponsor, Transline Technology, who makes precision RF and microwave PCB antennas. I put the link in the show notes to all of our amazing sponsors, including Keysight Technologies and Signal Integrity Journal. So there's lots of educational resources for you to tap into there. So let's jump in now to our conversation with Steve Sandler of Picotest. Hi, Steve. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's so good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you too. I always enjoy talking to you. So it's nice to be here.
Thank you. Well, it was so nice to see you and your right hand, Emma, at DesignCon and see your face. It'd been so long. And I popped in your class there at DesignCon, your boot camp with Heidi and Jack, and it looked like it was full strength to me. Did you think you had a good turnout? I mean, it was standing room only.
Yeah, I think they told me that it was the single most attended session they had, which is nice to hear. You know, Heidi and Jack and I have been doing this together now for a couple of years. Heidi and I started, and we invited Jack back in 2018. But it's a really great team, and people really love the fact that, you know, they get the simulation side, the measurement side, and of course the expert in FPGAs himself. So it was great. We really had fun doing it.
So I should fill in our listeners that Heidi is Heidi Barnes of Keysight, and Jack, you'll have to fill me in on Jack. I don't know him.
And he's one of the gurus at, I was going to say Xilinx, but now it's AMD, right?
Yeah.
Wow. What a difference that makes.
I know, exactly. It's hard to catch up. All the logos are changing on these people's cards, right?
Yeah, but Jack is an FPGA expert, and it's always fun to work with him too.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd get you on. It's been a while since you and I have talked on the podcast, but we've done this a few times in the past. So for people who may not be acquainted with your work, Steve, can you take a quick minute to introduce your background and then tell us a little bit about your company, Picotest?
Sure. Well, I guess the white beard gives it away, but I'm old. So I've been doing power electronics for a very long time. I've been in power electronics since the 1970s, so 40 some odd years. I spent most of that actually as a rocket scientist, working first on the space shuttle way back when. And I worked on rocket science up through, actually I'm still doing it today. But I'm an expert in modeling and an expert in simulation and mostly in power integrity and power electronics, but I also get involved in RF and other stuff, so I get to play with a little bit of everything.
It was fun last week when I did the podcast with Matt Ozalas. I didn't know that you two knew each other.
And then you told me heroes.
And I had no idea. I always say this industry is a small town.
It is. So yeah, Matt is one of my superheroes, and he is probably the greatest expert in RF power amplifiers that I've ever met. Maybe in RF overall that I've ever met. And he does really great videos and tutorials on things that just kind of blow your mind. So.
Well, I happened to run into him at the International Microamp Symposium last week. I didn't think I was going to get to see him, but it turns out we're both serving on the steering committee for 2023 in San Diego. So I'll put that link for our listeners below in case they want to, if they're interested in RF. But he was telling me that he had been talking to you and Eric Bogatin, and he's like, we should do a podcast because from signal integrity, power integrity, and what I'm doing in RF, we're starting to realize how many crossovers there are. So. That's
Yeah,
me throwing the gauntlet down, hoping I can talk you into that later, but I'm sure you've had offline conversations with him about that.
yeah, and it would be a lot of fun. But you're right that I mean everything kind of interacts these days, especially as things get smaller and performance gets better. Everybody's more dependent on everybody else, and
Yeah.
maybe some of your listeners saw it, but I did a a panel discussion this year with Tektronix on the current challenges, and they invited Masashi Nagawa from Corvo, and Masashi is a power supply expert, and of course Corvo makes RF power amplifiers, and so we had a lot of fun talking about the challenges of getting clean power for RF power amplifiers and what happens if the power quality is not good enough. So yeah, everything impacts everything these days,
Yeah.
and so the world is getting smaller by the day.
Well, and it's really funny because I've had a sense that my RF life and my high speed digital life have been separate, and like more and more it's all coming together, as evidenced by that weird thing of you and Matt having, interacted many times. And you have a long history with a lot of the test and measurement companies, but
Yeah.
particularly, don't you have, forgive me for forgetting, but I know you have a special designation by Keysight.
Yes.
Shout out to our great sponsor.
Uh-huh.
So what is that?
So, I do a lot of things, right? And even back as far as the 1980s, I was very involved in computer simulation. And back in those days, it was all garbage in, garbage out. Nobody believed simulators, whatever. But I was one of the early simulators. And flash forward a lot of years to, I want to say it was around 2008 when I realized that power guys were going to have to know something about RF and microwave because power supplies
Hmm.
were becoming RF and microwave. So I decided I was going to buy this program that I could do EM simulation and stuff. And I started shopping around, and the one that I finally chose was Keysight's ADS.
Hmm.
Back then, I think it was Agilent then. Um,
Yes.
but I bought this simulator and I had no idea what to do with it. But I figured I would somehow learn. And I spent since 2008, learning about EM simulation and how it is that we can apply that to things like power supplies. Not only how to apply it to power supplies, but how it applies to end to end simulation, which I think is
Hmm.
really the essential goal, right? So I know the RF guys are worried about phase noise, and the digital guys are worried about time jitter, and the power supply guys, they're worried about power supply noise. But how do we get all of those into a single simulation? And so the reason I chose ADS is because it was unique in the ability to do all of those things. And now, flash forward to today, it even does electrothermal and it does EMI and all that. Um, I wouldn't say that it was a focus, but somehow, some way along the way, I became a certified expert um, in ADS simulation. And so I am a Keysight certified expert, and that's been really fun. Mostly working with Heidi Barnes over the years,
Hmm.
but bringing what I know to ADS and learning what ADS has to offer in other spaces and how it is that I could apply that to power supplies. And so, like I said, we brought Jack into the mix, and that kind of added some new blood. And now Ben Dannon from Northrop Grumman, he's become part of the clan, and he just became a Keysight certified expert also.
Oh, he
Yeah,
did.
he did just recently, and it's not something I think that anybody plans to focus on. It just you really just get lost in it, and somehow it just happens. So I did become a Keysight certified expert, and I'm very
I
proud of
just
it.
I just see a hat that's like super
Yeah,
geek.
yeah. See, I even have my Keysight
Oh,
certified expert mug. So
there it is. And there's a cup to prove it.
there you go.
Well, I remember you did this really fun video, and maybe if we could dig it out. One of my favorite little videos you did, because I'm a civilian and not electrical engineer, was the tour you did of your lab.
Yes.
And you have every toy there is, and I'm like, and one, it's the most organized. lab I've ever seen in my life with all the Picotest probes. And anyways, it's a great tour. And I think people were probably drooling. And I remember on the wall, it said ADS certified expert or something. So
It does.
I couldn't remember exactly what the designation was, but I know you work with a lot of the test and measurement companies.
Yes.
Tell our listeners a little bit about Picotest, because I think that's an interesting story as well.
So Picotest, I'm not sure exactly how that came to be because I wasn't really looking for another company. Um, but I guess I got bored and I needed something to do. And I met a guy that was the general manager of a company in Taiwan called Picotest. And they made test equipment. They made really good benchtop test equipment. And he gifted it to me for my lab. And I said, wow, this stuff is so great. I really love it, but I never heard of your company. And he said, well, we're not that big in the United States. We don't have a big brand there. And so to be short, that's why I named my company Picotest. I got the trademark rights from him so that I could help him promote his brand. But I had a single goal, and the single goal was to provide the niche products that nobody else made. And for example, if you wanted to measure Bode plots for your power supply, you could go and you could buy a vector network analyzer from Keysight. They make really good ones, and other companies do too. But you spend all this money on a network analyzer, and they don't make the injection transformer. And I thought that's really odd. So I can buy the instrument, but I can't make the measurement. So I got to go find somebody else that makes this injection transformer. When I started to look at the measurements that people were making and even the measurements that we were making, there weren't really these products that connect the instrument to the board, right? Everybody made the instrument. People made probes, but there wasn't really anybody making these devices that connect between the instruments and the board for the purposes of, doing the signal excitations and the bidirectional data transmissions and things like that. So I said, I'm going to make a company that does that. And we set off to fill those missing pieces. And we've done that since 2010. And we're a very small company, but we take pride in the fact that I think every major technology company is a Picotest customer, bar none, and we're very proud of that. We don't really do any research at Picotest. Somebody calls and says, "Hey, I need to make this measurement. You know how I can do that?" And I think about it and say, "Yeah, but the device you need doesn't exist. So I'll make it for you. That's what I'll do. I'll make it for you." And some of them catch on and some of them don't catch on. But that's really our mission in life, is to bring high fidelity measurements to people in a simple way, and just bridging that gap between the board they're connecting to and the instrument they want to measure from.
I think it's really, again, not understanding the full sort of ecosystem of that world, like why the instrumentation company, I guess, because the applications are all different, but why those aren't readily available from the instrumentation companies. I think that's a novice question, but anyway.
I've wondered that myself, and there's not really a good answer. But I'm going to give you, I think, the answer that is, I believe to be the truth. There's not enough money in it. I think it's that simple. The analyzer costs $40,000, and injection transformer costs $500, and people don't want to sell $500 things, at least not in the instrument companies. And so I think that the bottom line is there's just not enough money, or the volume isn't really there. We don't really care about that. We just care about helping people make the measurements they want to make. So for us, it's fine.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of times it's just, I always wanted to try that. I wonder if I could do that. Yeah, probably. Why not? Right? I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
So you and I were talking recently, and I thought our listeners would be interested in this tool you developed. You call it NISM, but I'll let you unpack the acronym. And then could you tell us about that non-invasive S. Help me
Sure.
with
Non-invasive stability margin.
stability. Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
So tell us about your tool. Tell us how you developed it, and then we'll dig into that a bit.
Well, you know me a long time, so you know everything has a story, right?
Everything.
And
But I
so,
like your stories, and I think our
yeah.
podcast listeners do
Well,
too.
so there is a story here. I'm a rocket scientist by trade. That's what I did for decades, and we've always been trained to worry about control loop stability. Control loop stability, it impacts noise, it impacts dynamics. Power integrity is based on that. And just like everything else, it keeps getting smaller and more dense and more problematic. In fact, I'm working on a video now. Let me see if I can show your listeners this little board. Um, but that little chip in the middle, that's what they call a PMIC, and it's got 14 power splices in that one integrated circuit, and that powers the FPGAs and all the peripherals. They have bigger ones in cell phones. Some of them have 80 power splices, one chip.
Unbelievable.
But when you put 80 power supplies into one chip, you're limited to pins. So they left out some pins. The pins they left out are the ones that you would use to make stability measurements.
I see.
That's not good. So I had this brainstorm. You know, what I could do is just cut and jumper the printed circuit board. And maybe, you know, with a couple little wires, maybe I could figure out how to inject a signal. As I went to NASA and I said, you got an Exacto knife. I want to cut up your board. And they said, what? I said, I just need an Exacto knife to cut up your board. And they're like, that ain't happening. Yeah. And so I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to measure stability then, but we still need to measure stability, even though we don't have access to it. And so I wondered whether or not it would be possible to come up with a way that you could measure stability without having to cut NASA's boards so that they wouldn't be upset. And it took me a while, but I actually did figure out how you do that. And it actually worked out pretty well. In fact, the University of Reading said, we'd love for you to do a PhD in control theory focused on your non-invasive measurement. And I did. I enrolled in the University of Reading as a PhD student
You did.
to do my NISM. And I got close to the end, and two things happened to derail that. The first is they told me I would have to publish the math. And I wasn't willing to do that.
Oh, that's your secret sauce.
Yeah, exactly. So that was problematic. And then they closed the control loop school. So I never finished my PhD. But Omicron Lab, who was, I was good friends with them. We're sales partners. And they said, we'd love to be the first one to have your non-invasive stability margin tool built into our vector network analyzer. And so that'd be great. So 2011, we did that. And we put it into the Omicron Lab vector network analyzer, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it. It's just included. And people liked it. In fact, some of the cell phone companies use it exclusively for measuring their PMICs. But then the instrument companies said, well, you know, how come Omicron's the only company gets to do what we want it to? So we did. We made it available for the Keysight analyzers, the 5061B and the 5071, which were the popular ones. And then Rode and Schwartz said, well, what about us? You know, we got the ZNL and ZNB, so we put it into those. And then Copper Mountain said, what are we, like, you know, chopped liver? How come we don't get it? So we made it available for Copper Mountain too. And I don't know that it's been published anywhere, but I can tell you really exciting. It's actually coming to the ADS simulator. And I'm actually doing that video now. So it's actually going to be available for simulation also. And it's really cool. So what it allows us to do is just take a simple browser probe. We put it on the output capacitor, and the instrument tells us what the stability margins of the control loop are.
It's interesting how that has spread across.
Yeah, and it's really an interesting measurement, and people are starting to break off pieces of it and dissect them even further. So I think Scott Witcher, who I think you know, is giving a paper at DesignCon this year on how you can use NISM to quantify the flatness of a power rail, right? We all talk about the fact that we want flat impedance for power integrity, but Scott's focus is how flat is flat. I mean,
Oh,
how do we talk about flatness? So do I
yeah,
say it just as a little bump, or do I say it as a bump that's bigger than I would like? How do we quantify that? And so Scott's
right.
giving a paper using NISM to quantify how flat is flat.
Hmm. That sounds like, yeah, if it's not defined, what does it mean? So sounds like a valuable talk. So when you said, when did you start doing NISM? You said 2000,
Around 2010, it actually got put into the Bode
2010,
100 Omicron lab in 2011. So it's
okay,
existed since
10 years old.
2011. Yeah. What's really shocking, and I never ever guessed would happen, is it looks like NISM will come to the first oscilloscope probably next year. I never dreamed that you would see frequency response measurements in an oscilloscope, much less things like NISM built into an
Right.
oscilloscope, but that's coming too. So,
Interesting. It's
yeah.
really, do you have anything you want us to point at? You've mentioned some of the tool sets that it's in. Do you have talks about it that maybe go more depth than we have time to do in a
Um,
short podcast?
Yeah,
Or
there are some really good ones, and I would suggest that a good place to start is our solutions page. So if you go
okay,
to picotest.com, there's a measurement solutions page, and if you go there, there are pages dedicated to NISM, and when you go into those pages, my lectures and videos and all that stuff will be there. And of course, it's in my online class too. We have an online measurement class, and
yeah, I'm going to talk about that one later.
yeah, we do
So
that. We do it there also. But it's
okay,
pretty easy to
so
find now. If you just type NISM in a simulator, in a search engine, it'll come up.
okay, for our listeners, I'll go root all that good stuff out for you and put it in the show notes, so it'll just be a click away. All right, something else you and I were talking about, because again, we haven't seen each other in like two
Too long.
plus years. Too
Too
long.
long,
It's
right?
just
Yeah.
dumb. And I wanted to come to your sometime going through Phoenix. I wanted you to make me a pizza in your pizza oven. Dang it. Um,
You'll have to
maybe
come.
someday.
Yeah, you'll have to come.
Maybe someday, maybe. But anyways, we were kind of just thinking about the ways in which COVID has changed, sort of the landscape for the whole electronics community. And so, as for you personally, um, how has it changed your business during this time for Picotest? And then, what are kind of some obstacles you've watched? But also, you were talking about some opportunities that I thought were interesting that I thought our listeners would want to hear more about.
Yeah. So, I mean, COVID is really huge for all businesses, right?
Yeah.
And we weren't really sure what it was going to mean to us, especially being a small business. Uh, but it didn't actually go the way that we expected. I mean, there were things that were big changes. Like I was a lecturer, right? So what do you do
Yeah.
when
And
you run around the world lecturing and meeting engineers and you can't do that anymore?
yeah.
So, of course, like everybody else, everything went virtual really quick. And I was virtually
Mhm.
meeting with customers and I was virtually giving lectures. Our hands-on workshop became an online workshop, so that people could take the classes online. And that actually went pretty well. In fact, one of the things that we found is that we were able to reach so many more engineers,
Yeah.
in a given space of time, and we were able to focus more on what it is the customers needed individually, rather than trying to figure out, what general topic could I cover that many people would be interested in. Because
Mhm.
the difference when you give a lecture in a big auditorium, you have to try to talk about things that everybody in the room is going to like, but
Right.
but not necessarily any depth that one particular person is going to like. And so now I could have, online sessions with the Facebooks and Amazons of the world and focus on what it is that they wanted to know, what measurement did they need to make, or, what couldn't they do. Another thing that happened, I guess, is that everybody was working from home. And
Yeah.
because engineers were working from home, working on simulators isn't so hard, but what about actually making the measurements?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, engineers all had to build these home labs. And so one thing that we didn't expect is that our sales really boomed because of engineers that needed to set up home labs so that they had their probes and vector network analyzers and whatevers. They also were working more individually than in teams. So, where somebody in the team knew how to make a measurement, maybe you didn't. Now, all of a
Right.
sudden, you had to become an expert in that measurement too. And
Mm-hmm.
so, our classes did really well through COVID also. And I think that, even coming out the other side now, um, we still do a lot of our stuff online because it's so much more effective. We just did a poll on LinkedIn about how we should do our next session on ground loops, and the predominance of people said they'd really like to see it online. And I guess that wasn't shocking. I expected most people would say, "Oh, we'd love to see that as a free webinar," because engineers love free stuff, and so a free webinar, that's really awesome. I expected that. What I didn't expect is that the responses said that people would rather pay for an online class than see it at a conference. That I found
Yeah.
surprising.
Well, so here's my 2 cents on that, but I would like to hear your perspective.
Hmm.
As you know, my own experience of going through COVID and everything, all the mess that. But I think now, as we come out of COVID, like I just came from International Microwave Symposium in Denver, and that show normally has, say, I don't know, 8, 9,000 people, top
Hmm.
capacity, and they had 6, 7,000. So there's clearly a hunger to be back in person,
Yeah.
particularly getting your hands on and talking to subject matter experts and all of that. But one thing I observed is there is a whole swath of engineers that maybe were working for smaller companies or were freelancing or on contract that didn't have the budget to get on an
Right.
airplane, get budgeted for training. And I feel like we widen the circle, you know,
I think it's true. And
to
there's a
let
lot of
more of those
companies that,
people in.
yeah, a lot of companies, they don't want the engineers to be gone from the office that long, right?
Well, and then there's been travel restrictions.
Yeah.
And
Well, travel
depending on where you are
restrictions.
in the world,
Yeah, travel restrictions, and there's travel costs and the hotels. And one thing I did notice at DesignCon was that the hotel rates were much lower than they were in past years.
hmm,
And that I found really surprising because if you go on vacation now, you've noticed how crazy expensive hotels are. But the block rate for the conference was like 40% lower than it was a year ago. And I think that's because people don't have the budgets and they're trying to make it affordable so that engineers can travel. But I think you gotta put people into these two buckets and look at it from two different perspectives. On the one hand, we all love to go to the conferences because we get to see our conference buddies.
right,
When would I see Eric and Isvan, and Bert and all these guys if it wasn't at the conference? It's like, with your family, you see them at weddings and funerals. For us,
right,
we see them at conferences. And
absolutely,
and of course, in the conference, everybody's showing off their latest new toys, and engineers
right,
love toys. So I want to go to the conference because I want to see the toys. Uh,
right.
but from a practical standpoint, even if they have to pay for an online class, if they paid $100 or $200 for a class, it's much less than the flight, the hotel,
Yeah,
the $800 that it costs to register, and the week that they're going to be out of the office. Instead, they're going to be out of the office for a couple of hours, paying attention to this thing. And another thing that's actually been expressed to me by a lot of these engineers is that if they watch it online, they can watch it over and over again. And when they go and
yeah,
see this paper at a conference, they don't always get it the first time. In fact, I was talking to Scott this morning about his paper, and he said a lot of these, tutorials and things that I've given, he's watched 5 or 6 times until it finally goes, "Oh, I get it."
yeah,
And so, you can actually learn at a slower pace that way, which is good. And you even get to select the time, which I
right,
think most of us have done, right? I mean, I sign up for every webinar, but I don't usually watch them live. I sign
right.
up so that I'm registered, and then I watch it when I got the time to watch it.
Yeah,
And so I
absolutely.
think there's part of it that's that also. So a lot of that stuff happened during COVID. And
And I think with a lot of trade shows, like, they don't record the sessions, but they'll give you a presenter's slide deck, but you miss all the good stuff that was said between the bullet points, right? And
right,
so, and like you said, and then you can jump ahead to minute XYZ and just get that one piece. So, yeah, it's just very interesting times. But to me, and I think it's not going to be an either or. I
you're
think
right.
it's just expanded what we can offer, who we can reach. But, based on like DesignCon this year and IMS, people are dying to be back together. I mean, I was so happy to see people. I'm
Yeah.
not made to be. Well, most of us are not meant to be locked up in our
Oh, for sure.
house
Yeah.
offices
Even
or
I made
whatever.
it to APEC this year.
Mhm.
I made it to DesignCon this year, and I mean, I'm as hungry as everybody else. And I know,
Yeah.
probably a lot of your listeners don't know that I had some significant health issues, and so I
Yeah.
was seriously compromised and wasn't able to even be outside. So, for me to be able to go to APEC was like, earth changing. And so for that, it was really great. But I think that there's this space for, podcasts like yours. And I think
Mhm.
that one of the things engineers like about it is that for some reason, and maybe it's the way it's supposed to be, they listen to me on a podcast, so now they think they know me, right? And they feel
Yeah.
comfortable asking me questions. I get
Yes.
emails. I'm learning to make pizza. Can you give me some tips? And it's because they feel like they know me now because this is a casual environment we're in right now, right? And
Right.
this is just two friends talking, and
Yes.
wow, Steve's not a bad guy. I think I could probably just send him an email, and I'll bet he'll answer me.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that part of it too.
Well,
One
that's
thing,
the
yeah,
whole. Go ahead, Steve.
yeah,
Sorry.
one thing we didn't talk about is that just as COVID hit, we had this really interesting time where we had new products that were coming out. Our new 2-port probes and a new 1-port probe, and
Oh,
just
yeah.
before COVID, our manufacturer said that they reviewed their business strategy, and our probes no longer fit into their business plan, and they weren't going to make our probes.
Oh,
And
yikes.
we were like, we're supposed to be delivering them in 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Whoops.
How do you
Oh,
decide 2 weeks before you deliver them that you're not going to make them? And so I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we did have the time during COVID that we had to make this mad dash and learn how you make a probe. Everything from how do you write a manual, and how do you design a probe? How do you make the case? I mean, what about these blow molded custom foam things? What about demo boards and all of the ecosystem that goes into this? And so during COVID, we actually did all this, and 8 months later, we released, I think it was 12 new products that we now had to. I shouldn't say had to because it's been really pleasurable manufacturing them ourselves, and it was a real challenge, and at the same time, it gives us back so much more freedom of our time schedules, freedom of what it is that we want to do. A lot of the manufacturing companies, they're very focused on return on investment. And as a small company, we don't care. I want to make stuff that people need. I want to help people make great measurements. And some of what we do makes money, and some of what we do doesn't make money. And I don't really care as long as I'm not losing money on average. Life's good. So that was a really interesting time for us. Just learning how it is that we make things that we've never made before.
well, kind of piggybacking on that, it's like we're all reinventing ourselves. Like you said, doing measurements at home. And I was like a little like, oh my gosh, wonder if you work at a prime and you have this awesome, super well equipped lab with all your instruments. What are you going to do when you go home? Like, and people figured it out. We just figured it out. I mean, good
Yeah.
Lord, when I was back at Altium, we had a green room. I had a yellow chair. We had people come in physically,
Yeah,
and then it's like, I have to podcast from my living room now.
right.
And like you said, I was wholly dependent on videographers and producers and this and that. But hey, now I know how to podcast from home. And
Yeah, so another funny story. So, part of what happened with that is that, a year, 2 years ago, we would have been horrified if the dog walked in while we were doing a webinar, or even worse, barked, right? So I was doing a webinar for Tektronix, and my good friend Tony Ambrose, who's an application engineer, regional, I think he's a regional manager for Tektronix. He was here in my home lab, where we were making all these measurements and recording the video for the webinar. And you've never been to my house, but right next to my lab is my wife's bird room, where she has 7 parrots. And the 7 parrots can make the sound of every instrument that I own, and they'll drive you crazy because they'll be pushing buttons that you didn't think you pushed. And did I push the button? Didn't I push the button? I don't remember if I pushed the button, whatever. So we're listening back to the webinar, and one bird in particular was very chirpy. And we tried noise filters and whatever, and we could not get Sonny's chirps out of the video. So now in that webinar, my Kaik has a bio as an AVN intern in power integrity measurement, and a headshot and the whole bit, because they realized there's just no way we're going to get this, bird chirping out of the webinar. So I think we just need to own it. And
that's funny.
Sonny got his own bio and everything. But this has become okay now, right? It's okay if your kids run into the room while you're recording.
So true.
Yeah, another story. Back in 1998, I was working on the International Space Station. And at the time, I owned AEI Systems, which was in a separate space, but it was attached to my house. And I had Rocketdyne and Boeing and a bunch of companies in my facility for a design review. And my daughter comes running and jumps in my lap and says, "Hi, Daddy." And I was absolutely horrified. And I was like, oh my God, now what do I do? And everybody just loved it. Nobody was put
Yeah.
off by it. Everybody loved it. And I'm thinking, I have this humble little office that's attached to my house, and it's a very small company. We only had a few employees, and my office overlooked the swimming pool. And then it would start. So Boeing called and said, "We'd like to have a design review. We're wondering if you would mind if we used your house." And I said, "What?"
Really?
And they said, "Yeah, we'd like to use your office if you don't mind, because it's a nice, quiet, and peaceful space. It's out of our office, so we don't get the distractions. Space Systems Laurel, hey, would you mind if we had a design review at your facility?" And I was thinking, this is really a terrible thing that my daughter ran in and
Yeah.
jumped in my lap, right? And it really wasn't. And I think we've seen that from COVID now too. We just introduce our dog, right? And everyone says, "Oh, it's your dog, love
Absolutely.
it."
And right. Our pets, our kids. One of my funniest, well, I had a couple. In fact, our listeners, if you want to tell us your funniest, like COVID, Zoom call, that would be funny to collect those.
Oh yeah, that'd
My
be
fun,
great.
wouldn't that be fun?
It
My
is.
funniest one was this kind of junior executive where I was working. She had a toddler, but she was very buttoned up and professional and executive presence and all that. And we were on a big Zoom call. There was probably 20 people in the call, and we're going through stuff. And her daughter runs the room and says, "Mommy, I have to go poo poo."
Right.
And it was just awesome. And then I was on the phone also with the industry standards body who shall not be named. And nobody had their cameras on, but I was working in a culture where everyone had their cameras on at all times. And I'm like, "Hey guys, aren't we going to turn on our cameras?" And the one young guy said, "Yeah, I will." And he was having trouble. And then he was able to flip his camera on, but he walked away from the screen and walked back.
Uh-huh.
And when he did that, I could see he was in plaid pajamas with a sweatshirt. But I saw him in plaid pajamas, and I'm like, "Oh, man, the world has
Yeah, there is a lot of
changed
that going on right now.
forever."
Yeah. Yeah, there
So
is a lot of that going on right now. But I think, to some extent, this is really great. Um, and I think that that's one of the things that happened during COVID is people have this really different perspective on what their life is and what their life work balance is.
right,
And
and we're
that's
not
not going to
apologizing for having a life,
right. That's not going
that
to go
we
away.
no, and we realize actually we've been more productive working at home, even with the kids, the dogs, and the parrots.
Yes.
And, so in some ways, because I am a very relationally focused person, I think it's kind of humanized us all. So it doesn't matter what
Right.
letters are after our title or
It's a
whatever
good
it
word.
is.
I like that
Um,
word. I'm going to borrow that one. Humanized. I like that.
yeah, I think it's and in some ways, I mean, that was sort of the why I wanted to do this exactly and start my own company like a crazy woman. But I wanted to continue to scale on that one, as you said, end to end,
Right.
because everything, all the lines between all the disciplines and the effects are just blurring. And there's all these like spots where engineers can get bit hard if they're
Yeah.
just not aware. So
Right.
it's trying to create
Yeah.
the awareness from people like you in those fuzzy areas. And then also I hope I'm going to try very hard to build an online community because I'm a good a facilitator of community. The magic is in what happens among engineers and experts and solutions and things that happen.
Yeah.
And
And you're
so
connected to so many experts, right?
right. And so I think, ultimately that's my goal is to facilitate that, jump
Yeah.
off that. And then maybe at some point, whether it's at other people's conferences or what we end up doing with that is just to facilitate
Yeah.
that learning, that community, and not move into that humanity, not away from it, because I think it's been a really interesting sort of tipping point that we don't even know exactly you know,
Yeah.
what all the implications are quite yet.
I think the timing is good for that, and I think that there are a lot of open-minded engineers, and in particular, engineers haven't really been able to get so much training. In fact, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that professional, almost every profession requires continuing education.
Absolutely.
Engineering doesn't, right? We don't require
Some
it.
do, some well,
If you're a professional engineer.
if you're a professional engineer, then
If
you
you're
have
not
to
a
do the
professional
continuing.
engineer, there isn't any requirement. And in fact,
Right.
most companies don't really believe that it's necessarily worthwhile. And that's, a space where things like what you're doing are really so powerful. And, like I've been on Robert Faranick's podcast a few times, and he's always interested in that also. If his audience, it's mostly board designers,
Yeah.
could just learn what it is that the pitfalls are. They don't need to be experts in the pitfalls, but if they know
No.
that the pitfall is there,
Yep.
then they can either go off and learn about it on their own. They could look for other podcasts or webinars that'll, fill in their gaps in knowledge. Or
Right.
I'll get emails from them saying, "Hey, I'm
Yep.
designing this board and I'm really worried about it. What do you think?"
Yep.
And most of us are happy to help other people. So I think that that's probably the way engineers are going to learn how it is that what they do impacts other areas, but also is impacted by those other areas. Right? Everybody's
Absolutely.
touching everybody else, and sometimes
Everything.
that's in a
Yeah.
good way, and sometimes it's not.
Right. And it's too expensive and it's too yeah, it affects everyone else, but in a profound way where things break and don't work.
Exactly.
And it's expensive and it's costly and, so yeah, that's kind of the whole purpose of me calling this the ecosystem, with the double
Yeah, which
E
I
is
love.
like,
I really love that.
thank you,
I
is
did.
to
I do.
put that whole SIPI board layout, and
Yeah.
I am going to be doing some interesting things with Robert Faranick too, because I think he's, offers a phenomenal value. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
Steve Sandler, um, I just saw a sneak peek of some training you have on Federal Academy, actually, I'm going to be
Yeah.
doing a podcast with Robert just a couple days after this one. And we're going to talk about the incredible training platform he's created. And so he has set up a place for you
Yes.
to host that online training. So I'm going to put the links to your landing page into that space because, wow, it looks great. And there's kind of something for everybody and every price point. And
Yeah.
how great you could at any time just go tap the brain power of all your 40 plus years of wisdom. So I
Yeah.
think that's invaluable.
One of the
So
interesting things about the class is how many instrument companies signed up for that class. The AE,
really,
yeah, it was really phenomenal. But let me tell you, the way that happened, it was COVID. We did in-person hands-on workshops for individual companies, and we still get requests, like from Facebook to come in and do an on-site class, but we did these hands-on workshops. And now we couldn't, but people still wanted the training. We just couldn't do them in person. And so we tried to figure out how could we do this in a reasonable way online, and we looked around and we were going to do it ourselves, and we realized how much goes into making a platform. But
oh,
I had taken Robert's classes on
mm-hmm.
Southium classes, and so I knew about his platform. And I reached out to Robert and we talked about it. And he said, I'd love to host your class for you." And so we said, "Awesome! We'll put it on Federal Academy," and that's been great. He gave us our own pages and all that, but all of the infrastructure is Federal Academy. And then we had to try to figure out how to make it an experience for the attendees that was still a reasonable experience. This was a hands-on class; it wasn't a listen to me talk.
Right.
And so we created an online class that was part lecture and part measurement, and we did all the measurements we did in the hands-on classes. And then we figured, well, people are going to need the demo boards and all the things that we used in the hands-on workshop. So we took the hands-on workshop material and we made that available as a kit. So that if you want to go make all these measurements, you can. You just buy the kit and it'll come with all the demo boards and everything we measure in class. Then
Oh,
you can go
neat.
off, measure them yourself. You know what the right answer is supposed to be, whatever. And then it even has a forum, which is also part of what Robert
I know. I
does.
love it.
Yeah, so we have a forum where people can write to me and ask me questions about the class or, provide feedback. And there's even a scoring system. So, just like Amazon, I'm subject to the reviews, and like them or not like them. Everybody, not only they leave a review, but they almost have to, because if they want to get their certificate, they had to submit their feedback forms. And so I think 99% of our attendees actually do fill out the feedback. And thankfully, I think the last time I checked, it was a 4.8 something out of
Oh,
5 rating.
nice.
So we're very pleased with it. But Robert had all of that, already built in, all of that infrastructure. So we didn't have to worry about the platform. We only had to worry about writing the class. And even there, I'll say that Robert was so much help. Robert's done so many of these classes on his own that he wasn't willing to put his class up until he reviewed it himself, and he gave us some
Right.
tips on how to do things better. And together we kind of got through it, and we made a 12-week online class.
So, of course, watchers, listeners, I'm going to put that in the show notes and absolutely go tap it. It's an amazing platform. Um, the content looks stunningly good quality, high quality, and again, that that of replicating that hands-on. And again, you don't have to ship expensive instruments and have them get lost on FedEx on your way to
Yeah.
teach.
And it does get lost. I don't know if I ever told you that story, but we actually did. We did lose a lot of equipment in the process. Yeah, and so yeah, this is much better, and we can reach so many more people this way, and a
And
lot
it's
easier.
secure. And there's the forum. I know. I love it. And I'm sure before the day is over, we'll probably be putting up some training there for the ecosystem community.
Yeah,
And so we're in conversations now about that. And so there can be a forum for people
Yeah,
to
and
sort
Robert's
of
really easy to work with too, which is just so it's always a pleasurable experience too.
yeah.
So
He has a very generous, kind spirit, and
yes,
I really enjoy working with him. Okay, well, before I let you go, we could talk all day, because I enjoy it
and
so
tomorrow
much.
too, probably.
Yeah, right? But is there anything else, or how about giving our listeners a parting gift? Like, in today's post-COVID, what sort of advice would you give to electrical engineers, hardware engineers, systems engineers? Like, I know it's a really big ask, but what are a couple tips in with today's technology trends and everything you're saying? What are
Yeah,
like a couple key like pieces of
I'll give
Steve
you a couple.
Sandler wisdom?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple. So, right after the pandemic started, I did write a bunch of posts because one thing that I knew was that a lot of people struggle with working by themselves, working from home, and you need to have a certain amount of discipline, and also a lot of people struggle with the solitude. And so, the first tip that I would give engineers is if you are still working from home, it's easy to overwork. Don't,
Yeah.
right? Set yourself hours that you work and set yourself hours that you don't work. And if you can work in a separate place from where you live, that's even better. Leave, close the door. Remember to take breaks during the day and connect with people somehow, whether it's watching a webinar, a podcast, watching TV, just so that you feel like you're connected to other people. That'll really help. um, you mentioned productivity. Productivity is really up, and I know
Up.
businesses are saying we really need our employees back in the office. No, you really don't, and the numbers prove that you don't. Things are just fine, but it means that engineers have a little bit more time and a little bit more flexibility. What they do with that time, use that time to learn and learn those things that are going to let you get to the next level from where you are. I don't care what discipline you're on. If you're a board designer, you need to know about power integrity. You need to know about signal integrity. You need to know about RF. Um, Take some online webinar and podcast information so that you can learn better how it is that you impact other disciplines and how they impact you, and focus on that. Um, and focus on where it is that you think you want to be after life is whatever it is life is after COVID, right? I mean, we're still not on the other side.
Not
Um,
fully.
Eventually, we do get on the other side. And what does your life look like then? What have you learned, during this time, and what is it that you'd really like to be able to do or do better? And I think that I talk to engineers all the time. I mentor so many young engineers. If any of your listeners are looking for a mentor, I'm always happy to be one. So long as
Watch out, Steve Sandler.
I know,
what,
so long as they're
what are
willing
you
to work
doing?
hard, so long as they're willing to work hard, if they're willing to put in the effort, I'm willing to be their mentor. And so I would say, think about where it is that you want to be. What is it that you need to learn to get from here to there? Do it. Um, and use the opportunity to network. One of the best things about your podcast is you get to meet or e-meet so many different people that have
Yeah,
so much knowledge, um, and suck it up. Get all that knowledge you can. It's free.
it's free. That's why I
Just
love doing this work. And I should jump in right here or I'll be remiss, Steve, to mention thanks to our sponsors, Keysight. We have a new one, Transline Technologies, who are an RF PCB design specialist and also Signal Integrity Journal, because they help me have these great conversations with
that's
people like
awesome.
Steve Sandler. So
And I got a
shout out
soft
to
spot
them.
for all of them. So I'm glad to hear that they're sponsoring you. And I mean, like us, they really want to spread the message. That's a big part of what we do, is spreading messages, and
Right.
what we're doing here. So
Well, our goal here, which is absolutely in line with your sort of personal uh, sort of mission of generosity and mentorship, is we want to educate, connect, and equip engineers
there
to
you
do
go.
their best work. I think I admire engineers, even though I'm not one.
Well, you're
Um,
up by osmosis.
yeah. Weirdly enough, I like it.
Uh-huh.
But don't ask me to do the math, okay? I just like hanging out with people like you.
That's good.
And
We're glad you do.
you've taught me a lot. Thank you for being a mentor and a teacher to me, Steve. And thank you for those great tips. I think that's a great place to stop. And those are really valuable right now today. So thank you so much for coming on again. I'm sure I
You
will
bet.
rope you into coming back again, but thank you so much for all that you shared
You
today.
bet.
Really
Hoping
valuable.
to see you in person again soon.
Yeah, I sure hope so.
Have a good one, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you. To our listeners, thanks so much for eavesdropping on this conversation with myself and power integrity expert Steve Sandler. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always go to the show notes where I'll load you up with great resources from Steve and Picotest and so many of the things we discussed. We're delighted to have you. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you next time. Until then, remember to always stay connected to the ecosystem.